Trial of the Chicago Seven, again, Netflix release in cinemas on Netflix in a few weeks' time. Um, so this is Aaron Sorkin's second directorial outing. He directed Molly's Game, you remember a few years ago. This is a sort of very showy romp about the real life prosecution of anti war protesters who were charged with conspiracy to cross state lines and incite a riot at the 1968 Democratic Convention. Here's a clip.
Do you have contempt for your government?
I'll tell you, Mr. Schultz, it's nothing compared to the contempt my government has for me.
We've heard testimony from 27 witnesses under oath that say you hoped for a confrontation with the police, that your plans for the convention were designed specifically to draw the police into a confrontation.
Well, if I'd known it was going to be the first wish of mine that came true, I would have aimed a lot higher.
It's a yes or no question. When you came to Chicago, were you hoping for a confrontation with the police?
Which is the kind of central question of the film, and also the fact that it's a political trial, it's a show trial. Originally envisaged for Steven Spielberg back in 2007. The project was on, off, writer's strike, held things up. Now comes to the screen, as I said, in cinemas, star-studded cast: Sacha Baron Cohen, Jeremy Strong as Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, Mark Rylance as the lawyer William Kunstler, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who you heard there, as Richard Schultz, the prosecutor, Frank Langella as the judge.
Wow.
So, say again?
I just said, wow, that is
Yeah,
an impressive cast.
It is quite the cast. In fact, funnily enough, there was a story in the original Spielberg version, although I think Sacha Baron Cohen was always involved. The original Spielberg version, they were going to cast largely unknowns. This also has Eddie Redmayne as Tom Hayden, John Carroll Lynch as David Dellinger, Kelvin Harrison Jr. as Fred Hampton, Michael Keaton as Ramsey Clark, and Yahya Abdul-Mateen as Bobby Seale. I mean, it would be easier to list the people that aren't in the film. So here's the thing: it's a strange hodgepodge. On the one hand, I do find that stuff really interesting. As you know, I have a Nixon obsession, so the whole thing about the incoming Nixon government basically deciding to clamp down on prosecute protesters. So I'm fascinated by that period anyway. It's also true that the trial itself is almost stranger than fiction in terms of the stuff that happens in the movie that you think that can't possibly have happened, and it did, and and weirder things happen. But it's impossible to watch a film which has got protesters being tear gassed and clubbed, or the sight of an African American being bound and gagged by a clearly politicized judiciary, and not see it as having contemporary relevance in the same way that Spielberg's film about newspapers that that basically kind of ran up to the beginning of All the President's Men clearly was a film made in response to contemporary politics. There is no way that you can watch this film without making those comparisons, and it is absolutely clear that Aaron Sorkin wants you to make those comparisons. If this is a film which is a historical period piece, actually, weirdly enough, 68 is the same period that Boys in the Band is, although the trial takes place after 68. So those comparisons are there. They're not subtle. They are there for you to make it impossible not to. So there is definitely a kind of a message thread. My issue with it is that there is also a lot of kind of caricature. There's a lot of wigginess. There is a lot of hair acting. There's also a lot of kind of courtroom contrivance and people banging tables and saying that. Now I know that the case itself actually was very theatrical, but you do half expect somebody to jump up and shout, "You can't handle the truth," because of course Aaron Sorkin wrote A Few Good Men, so it's almost like you expect him to revisit a cliche which he coined in the first place. I also think weirdly that the film does require a certain degree of investment in or knowledge of the original case. Characters are introduced in which it's kind of taken for granted that what their cultural, countercultural status was. And on the one hand, I can understand that, because you don't want somebody going, "Oh, well, here is so-and-so, they're important because blah, 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 blah." On the other hand, it did make it feel like it was, to some extent, not quite extending, the hand of friendship to the young audience that perhaps it ought to be engaging with. So I thought it was an interesting mix. I mean, Sorkin can write, and we all know this, and there is an interesting drama in there, and it is a star-studded cast. I'm not quite as knocked out by as some people are, although I've seen very divided reviews. I enjoyed it, but it did have a pantomime quality to it. As I said, it is very wiggy, and it's not. It felt fluffier than perhaps it should have done. And it's, I said, it's in cinemas now, and it's Netflix, I think, from October the 16th.